Something that was always going to have to happen when it came to adapting the A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms novellas as a TV show was dealing with how short The Hedge Knight actually is as a story. Even with 6 30-minute episodes, which might not seem like a lot, you're still going to have to find ways to stretch the story and fill in some gaps. I'm not going to call it filler, because for the most part, the way in which The Knight of the Seven Kingdoms handles this means at least some of these added scenes do serve a purpose in the story. Not all, but some, which is an extremely challenging thing to do without negatively impacting the pacing of the well-crafted narrative George R. R. Martin created. Episode 3, The Squire, seems to have threaded that needle very well for the most part, without the 3 episodes so far, it containing the most of these so-called filler scenes. I think the reason a lot of these added scenes work is they tend to focus on the relationship and dynamic of Dunk and Egg, which is at the heart and core of the story. Even these minor interactions help the viewer connect with them and their relationship even more, which only helps service the Egon plot twist at the end of the episode. It definitely seems like the first half of this episode was front-loaded with original content, and while most of it was good, there were 1 or 2 moments I think seemed a bit, well, unneeded for the most part. I really want to take a moment to focus on Egg during these opening scenes. It seems such a random thing to add into the show, with him taking Thunder off to practice being a squire, but at the same time, very endearing. Casting a child actor is a very hard thing to do. All you have to do is look at shows like Stranger Things, and well, Game of Thrones as well, to see how 50-50 it can be. You're taking a huge unknown gamble, especially with a show like A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, with the kind of actor this child would grow into. I think a fair criticism of Game of Thrones is that some of the younger child actors, while fantastic as children in the early seasons, didn't necessarily grow into the best actors as adults. I really think they've hit gold with Dexter Sol, and I think he's going to be an actor to watch out for in the future. What he's shown in these opening scenes is not that he just has great chemistry with Peter Claffrey, but he can also carry not just a scene, but the opening segment of the entire episode effectively single-handedly. It's a true testament to Ira Parker's writing, because this was all 100% new content, and Dexter Sol, not just being a good actor, but truly understanding the character he is playing, played a huge role in this. We also get an introduction to Sir Robin Riesling, who's considered the maddest knight in the realm. Again, a great bit of casting, with a performance dripping in sheer aura. And again, we have our weekly bit of body humour, with his eye dangling from his face as he charges in the lists. Now, if you know me, you know how much I love House Blackfyre and Blackfyre lore, so any little nuggets we get in the show is a plus for me. In this episode, we get this through Egg's song, while Duncan is throwing up. Not only does it give the viewer an idea about Baelor and Maekar's backstory, but at the same time dropping the Blackfyre lore that's so important to the latter novellas. In fact, the use of songs for lore drops so far in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms has been handled really well, especially when you also factor in the puppet shows. Seeing Sir Duncan as nervous as he is during the start of the episode is not something I originally thought that much about when I was reading the books. It's kind of obvious in hindsight he's going to be, but there's so much else going on, given how the story in the book happens on a much shorter timescale. Dunk frankly has a lot more to be worried about than just being nervous. Again, this element and scene is basically 100% new content from Ira Parker, but it really doesn't feel like it. It feels at home in the story and does a lot to humanise Duncan. It makes him so much more relatable. We also see here how Duncan truly is starting to care about Egg and understanding the mentor figure he's playing. The moment about the sewing a patch really highlights this. While Dunk is initially standoffish about the fact he's having to do it, in that same moment realises that of course Egg doesn't know these things. He's a knight. As this mentor, he has a responsibility to teach Egg. While it's a small moment, I really enjoyed Dunk initially tells Egg to have some salt beef for breakfast, much to Egg's displeasure. Yet the very next scene, Duncan is using the little money he has left to go and buy some fresh meat and goose eggs. While it's a small moment, it's really important in showing the audience how Dunk has started to care about this strange, well-spoken mystery boy. Low-key, I had no idea goose eggs were that big, by the way. It kind of seems that Dunk has invented the Westerosi McMuffin. I really love how these shots of Duncan Egg eating under the tree mirror similar shots between Duncan and Sir Arlen from episode 1. Getting that dynamic between Duncan Egg right was always going to be what makes and breaks the show, especially a small-scale story like A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, where you're deeply relying on character and relationships. I really can't find any faults thus far. It will be interesting how they manage the tonal and dynamic shift of their relationship after the Egon revelation. Once again, the tourney itself feels like a living and breathing thing. From the scene of Duncan buying the eggs, to Duncan Egg sitting on the hill, overlooking the tourney grounds, with Egg asking if he can stay with Duncan after the tourney. While all these moments are nice, chill and light-hearted, helping with the tone of the show, these small interactions that brought colour, life and realism to the world we first saw in the early seasons of Game of Thrones, that got lost as the scope of the story grew, and were frankly non-existent in House of the Dragon. It's a true street-level story. Now, the Master of Games basically informs Dunk that the youngest son of Lord Ashford was going to take a fall, thus effectively handing Dunk his first victory and a lot of gold in the process. For me, this was an odd inclusion, because given what happens at the end of the episode, this whole thread isn't really going to have a resolution. This was one of the only additional scenes added that truly to me did feel like filler. You can remove it and it has no impact on the story at all. Saying that, however, it does reaffirm Duncan's sense of honour and what he views as being a true knight, which I guess is still very important when you consider how the rest of the story plays out. The jousting, again, I think is the best we've seen in any of the HBO shows thus far. The sheer speed and brutality of it comes across perfectly. Sometimes with jousting scenes, not just in Game of Thrones, but in media in general, they come across as a bit slow and sluggish because of how they've been edited. So sticking with these longer shots with very few cuts really helps get across the speed and impact. Now, it's a really dumb and minor nitpick, but I have to try and find something to complain about. I find it odd how the 3 times Duncan and Egg have gone to see the jousting, they've wound their way up to the very front of the mass of the small folk. I kind of like how, in the book, they had to sort of fight for a place and Egg had to sit on Dunk's shoulders. It's weird how no one's complaining this giant of a man like Egg stood in front of everyone, blocking the view. But from a practical TV show production standpoint, and needing to show the audience the characters and their reactions, it makes sense the way they have approached it. Aerion's first joust in the book is extremely brutal, and I was wondering just how far they were going to go with it on screen. It certainly matched the kind of thing I was picturing in my head. While Aerion's initial introduction last episode should have given the viewers a negative vibe from him, his sheer arrogance, this scene should really hammer that point home. Not just arrogance, but the fact he has no honour and effectively did all this to rile up the small folk on purpose. What's interesting is the sheer contempt Baelor seems to have of Aerion, which is something we didn't really get to see at this stage in the book, and certainly helps set up events to come. Now, his armour, even when the trailer came out, divided opinion massively. I don't hate it, but I don't love it. I can take it or leave it. I can see what they were going for with it. Aerion thinks he's a dragon in human form. Therefore, he would style his armour to look like a human dragon. There have been some fair criticisms that Finn Bennett hasn't really leaned into the more flamboyant, bright flame elements of Aerion. But I think for the kind of show A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is, it makes sense to perhaps focus on the more sinister side of Aerion. While they could have given him the red and orange flame-like armour of the book, and as much as I would have loved that, it doesn't fit into the more grounded approach to Westeros the HBO shows have always taken. I think to its detriment, but it's consistent with what HBO's done before. It would be odd at this stage to have this out there armour design when everyone else is just not plain, more traditionally medieval. Still ornate, but not to the extremes of Aerion. Even the approach they have taken with the human dragon armour still stands out among the other knights in the show. Now, the fortune teller was certainly a choice, and I would never have thought that Ira Parker would be so on the nose about Egg's fate. But if he does intend to carry on past the published novellas, as he's indicated he plans to, ultimately all roads lead to Summerhall. It makes me wonder, given how much her words seem to trouble Egg, if he ever recalls what she said to him. Or maybe if this was the moment that he began his obsession that led to Summerhall. Now, there are some wild fan theories out there. One, the scar on the cheek of the fortune teller kinda looks like a birthmark, and that this person is actually Brendan Rivers in disguise. Which honestly would not surprise me at all. I did predict we might get a Bloodraven cameo in Season 1, but at this stage it does seem unlikely, and I really don't think the fortune teller was him. Dunk's fortune too was a bit odd, and I'm not sure how it fits. Now, just to clarify for anyone who's confused, the fortune teller saying Egg will be hated by those around him is half true. Egg was beloved by the small folk for all the reforms he made that benefited them, but in doing so he greatly angered the nobility, which is what the fortune teller is referring to. As someone who loves the deep lore, I loved this Summerhall reference, not just because of how important it is to Duncan Egg, but how it directly impacts the whole of the main story of A Song of Ice and Fire. We then get our weekly prescribed Lionel Baratheon party boy scene. I'm not saying I don't enjoy these moments, but it would have been nice to maybe have done something a bit different and a bit more meaningful, kind of like the first meeting in episode 1. The song about Alice, however, at first, kind of just had me a bit bemused. In the moment, it all seemed a bit, pointless. Little did I know, however, it would turn into a really powerful, true A Song of Ice and Fire scene. Egg's thoughts and insight into the meaning behind the song was not just profound for a boy so young, but exactly the kind of thing George R.R. Martin could have written himself. You could have given me those quotes and told me they were from a Tyrion chapter, and I would have believed you. I really like what the show's done with Raymond Fossaway. I really love his relationship with Stefan in the book, and I love how unfiltered he is. His rant about House Targaryen was brilliant. While some of his views are not necessarily true at this stage, it's really good to see on screen that House Targaryen aren't these universally beloved godlike figures. There are those who hold resentment towards them. What Raymond shows us in particular is that after the Dance of the Dragons and the loss of the dragons, House Targaryen were not these untouchable demigods that they once were when they had the power of dragons. War after war is going to create resentment, especially after the Blackfyre Rebellion. What I also love is the contrast between Raymond and Dunk. He shows the viewer just how idealistic and maybe naive Dunk is about the reality of being a knight. Dunk genuinely wants to give Aerion the benefit of the doubt about his actions thus far, with Raymond opening his eyes to the harsh reality of the world Duncan has entered. The puppet show was perfect and everything I wanted it to be. Aerion was truly unsettling and menacing in a way I don't think we've ever seen with a Targaryen before. Not even with Viserys in Season 1 of Game of Thrones, or the limited amount of screen time the Mad King's gotten. You can see the madness in his eyes. Beat for beat, this scene truly felt like the pages of the books have sprung to life. The brutality of Tanzel's broken fingers, and Egg's desperate plea to Duncan to help, even knowing at this point it would expose his true identity. There's this very brief moment, and I'm not sure if this was intentional or accidental, where after Aerion is kicked in the face, he kind of sticks out his bloody tongue, like kind of a serpent or a dragon tongue. Again, maybe leaning into the dragon in human form element of his character. The actual Egon reveal was also well done. The sheer disbelief and subtle hint of betrayal on Dunk's part, to Aerion's sheer arrogance and annoyance that Egon had gotten in his way. I think something that's made A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms feel so different from their other HBO shows is not just the tone of the story itself, but the combination of a very different approach to how it's been directed and the cinematography. A very different, punchy way of editing. And not just that, a very different style of music, but a different way of using that music. All of this coming together to make the show feel fresh, new and different, and the kind of thing the HBO shows have been needing for a long time. I think there were elements of episode 3 I didn't quite enjoy as much as 1 and 2. While the episodes are short, I didn't really feel it too much with episode 1 and 2. I can with episode 3. And I think that comes down to how little the story itself actually moved on. I think what's going to make or break the show is how they handle the tonal shift that happens after the Egon reveal and Dunk's arrest. Things are about to get a whole lot more serious. I hope they can thread the needle and get it just right. I gave episode 1 and 2 8.5 out of 10, which is a very high score from me. Most of the issues I have with this episode are very much nitpicks indeed, but I did think the episode in particular had a few pacing issues, so I would give the episode 3 a solid 8 out of 10 as a result. I'm loving the show so far, and it's almost everything I could have wished for a Song of Ice and Fire adaptation. I'm just hoping these last 3 episodes keep up this brilliant start.